Uh, Good evening, sir, and thank you for your brief description of the situation in China. I'm a development economist, and I've written a book about India, China, and globalization. And therefore, in that context, given the kind of research that I've done, I'd like to ask, it's also a comment and a question related to the comment. It's short. We've seen the kind of importance that China has in the global economy. Recently, we've seen that play out when the yuan was devalued, what happened in the global markets. And we also know that for the last 30 years, China, in a sense, has been a growth engine for the global economy. Currently, what China is going through is definitely a structural phase. It's a phase of transition. And all of us know here that China is transiting from being an export-driven economy to one that is largely domestic demand-driven. Not that exports won't be important, but we are talking in terms of the increasing importance of domestic demand. Now, that is, like you said in your closing statement, that there are many sources of long-term growth. What I'm worried about is that this transition that China needs to make. Two questions. One, I know it's difficult to actually speak about the time that a transition would take, but approximately the outer limit for that transition to take place. And secondly, when we talk about China's new sources of growth, whether it's expanding opportunities in the service sector, whether it's SOE reform, whether it's talking about small and medium scale enterprises getting greater access to credit, and whether it's stepping up the pace of domestic innovation, there are certain political connotations there. Now we all know that China has a certain political system. Do you think that given the kind of changes that are required, do you anticipate that the political system would make the necessary adjustments as quickly as it's required to make? Is that a matter of concern for you?
Two short questions, but it by no means, the answers are also, short. China has been already entered a phase of transition. How long will it take? I think at least 5 years, or maybe 10 years. It depends on the institutional reform, as well as policies, regulations, and the deregulations. So it depends, but it's I think. The majority of Chinese economists have already reached the consensus that will take at least 5 years, maybe 10 years. It's a short, not very short answer to your question. But as far as the political conditions is concerned, it's a little bit complicated. Yeah. In general, the Chinese people are happy with the political system we have now. When we are associated with political system, with economic performance, it shows that the Chinese political system is quite suitable for China's long-term economic growth, because with this political system we enjoyed 30 years fast economic growth. But it does not mean one size fits all. Everything is changing rapidly in the period of globalization, in the period of transition, and so on and so forth. So we need to get our political system adapted to a new environment. It's important, but I think when we talk about the relations between political system and the economic performance, we need, I think we need a balance between these two. Some people, to be frank, some people in China are strongly, demanding that, China needs a, democratic system, Western type of democratic. But the majority of Chinese people think, we need to find some special or unique road, unique institution for ourselves. One thing I'd like to emphasize, that is the budget, the taxation. When we, study the history of China's economic reform, one source of reform or opening up is the budget. When the government has no enough or sufficient, money to finance the economic growth, to finance the social stability, we are forced to reform. So the balance between politics and economics depends on the budget. So budget is a key to watch, to emphasize. Well, maybe my colleagues will have something to add.
I heard that you study also developing issues, etc. Actually, I'm doing research with some colleagues from RIS, Professor Sahin, also some experts from the European Union, also experts from the US. We study the what is common and what is the challenge of the innovation system in each country. That you said you are interested in what kind of situations might influence the performance of economy, also the domestic innovation. I'd like also hear a little bit from you about the innovation system here, national innovation system, also the innovation system domestically. What are the factors influence the performance of innovation system in India, and how is the situation? Because during our study, we came to the concept of inclusive innovation and inclusive development, etc. And we figure out that like India and China, we have large population, and so that the BOP model, bottom of pyramid, might function well. So I'd like also to hear a little bit from you about the BOP here in India. What is the situation right now, and what is the prohibit, and what is the advantage here? Thank you.
Always escapes. Discussion about China is China has one major shortcoming, and that is water. Data after data shows that China's biggest weakness is the absence of water. One of the studies shows only 2% of its landmass is water, compared to 9% for India, 12% for Russia. In fact, it is water that has driven it to a lot of conflict with some of the neighboring areas. The Mekong River is one, the Brahmaputra is another, and one of the areas in which China could resolve this is by, just like it's importing gas from Russia, it should be importing water also from Russia, because the greatest reservoir of water is Russia. Your views.
It's very.
She wanted to answer.
Water is so important, right?
Yeah, it is.
Can I answer the question after?
Yeah, you raised a very important and also interesting question. I have to admit that I'm not expert on this issue, but I think water is important in China. There's a quite big shortage of water in China compared to our neighboring countries, especially compared to Russia. And we have initiated several water transformation project from water-rich areas to the poor areas from south to north. We invested heavily in that project, and I think it's paying off. It's paying off. We come from Beijing, and the drinking water, our daily use water, we used or we drink. Part of them, comes from southern part of China, through tunnels, thousands of kilometers in tunnels. But I think this is only part solution to the water problem in China. Some people in China are thinking about importing waters from our neighboring countries. For example, Russia has a quite big, very large, lake in the north of China. Its reserves, the water reserves, sweet water reserves, accounts for one lake accounts for 20% of the world. It's quite huge. Yeah, huge. It's just an idea. But we, as far as I know, we have not any negotiations with Russia over this issue. We now are keen on importing natural gas and the crude oil from Russia, not water. Maybe in the future. Yeah, maybe in the future. Of course, you're right. We have debates. We have debates or disputes with our neighbors over water issues. For example, with India, with Mekong River-related countries. We are on the way to sign agreement with countries like Vietnam, Thai, Cambodia, and Myanmar over the water of the Mekong River. Yeah. It's very important.
Just
yeah.
one more point. The water shortage is so acute that China has the largest shale gas reserves in the world. You have not been able to exploit it. Sorry. China has the largest shale gas reserves in the world, but you've not been able to exploit it because of water. And the other thing is that whether you want to, your record in recycling water is perhaps the best in Asia. You are amazingly good at recycling water, but even then the shortage is going to manifest itself further as you industrialize, because industry is a water guzzler.
Yeah, you're right. There are many ways to use water more efficiently. So for example, so you mentioned the recycle, yeah, the water, and at the same time we try to deal with the water shortage with introduction of more market means. For example, we raise the prices of water. So this is I think it's a good way to reduce the water consumption. Yeah, many ways. There are many ways. Yes.
I'll make it short. I did a chapter for one of my books, which was called Globalization and Sustainable Development, comparing the innovation systems of China and India. I'll just give two brief observations that I made in this chapter. One was that when I looked at the innovation problems, the challenges that deter a faster pace of innovation in India and China, I found that both of both these countries have their set of challenges. But in India, the problem is less complex. See, in India, like China, India and China are both country of potentially of entrepreneurs. But in India, the faster pace of innovation is held back purely by a shortage in logistics, a shortage in R&D budgets, a shortage in infrastructure. It has skilled manpower, it has evolved to a point certain core competences, but it's not getting past the shortages. And the shortages are purely quantitative because politically and institutionally, India has an environment which encourages innovation. And ultimately, you would agree with me, innovation is not just a matter of allocations and targets. Ultimately, innovation is something, there is an intangible dimension. You have the aspect of ideas, you have the aspect of application. The second point is that when you're looking at, you spoke of bottom of pyramid. Now in China, the challenge that now India and China both need to look at the bottom of the pyramid and actually relate the innovations to the bottom of pyramid, and that's not happening enough in both for a variety of reasons. In China, I found that the main deterrent insofar as a faster pace of innovation is concerned is the political and institutional environment, and this despite the fact that you all have as was mentioned, very high R&D budgets for a developing nation, comparable to some developed nations. So there it is, you have the state-owned enterprises actually spearheading the process of innovation, technological innovation, but it's not happening enough at the grassroots, or it's not happening enough in the private sector, or in China's case, in the quasi-private sector, because there is that element of let's just say innovative capability that is held back in the kind of political environment that prevails in China. That is one factor. And the other factor is that the kind of technological, if I may say, adaptations that have taken place in China, I read, this is the perception, this is what I read, get from the reports that I read, it's not really suited for use in categories that are close to the bottom of the pyramid. So I think that is a problem common to India and China, but I would say it's a more serious concern in China, because in India the problem is ultimately a matter of quantitatives. In China, it's a matter of the kind of system that has actually worked so far.
Oh, to be frank, I am not familiar with this area, shipping goods to the outside world, or from outside world to China. What I can give you is an example regarding the crude oil shipment. About 80 to 90% of our imported crude oil has been, shaped by the foreign ship companies, foreign, carriers, not China. So I think China has a long way to go to be self-sufficient in terms of shipment of goods and the commodities. It's my impression. If you are interested in the numbers or figures of China's shipment, I can give you, after I come back to China. Yeah. Maybe you know some. Yeah. It depends on different sectors, different products or goods. Maybe.
So your question talking about the relationship between imports of exports in China's trade, right? Yeah, that's true. In nearly last 5 or 10 years ago, China mainly take more importance on export, and export-led growth policy is the major policy for our economic growth. Well, from 5 years ago, China has a relatively more balanced trade policy. That is, China pay more attention on imports and have many new trade strategies to increase imports. Well, as to imports, if we see data just for short term, that's true that we see a very large decrease of imports relatively to exports, especially in the first 8 months of this year. For short term, the reasons is that relatively low low price of commodities, sluggish demand of domestic economy. Well, as for the policy side, China still have a more balanced trade policy now, especially in the global value trade. We know that export and imports are closely related. So if China increase imports, that not only mean increase the imports of final goods, but also for the intermediate goods for our processing trade. So imports increase is also benefit for China's export. So if we have different kind of ways to see imports, well, especially if we see the one question for imports, we can see that is not due to China do not want to import some goods. As if we see the relationship between China and the U.S., that China has many export restrictions on U.S. goods to export to China. That's the one question. And also, if we see the trade imbalance between China and India, there's also a large trade deficit from India's side. Maybe one question is that China should, not only China should import more goods from India, but that's from India's side, you could provide more commodities that suits Chinese market. Thank you.
Yeah, you wanted the second question?
Well, the second question, sir, is somewhat perhaps a little more technical. The shipping, the ships, the number of ships that take care of transportation problems within China, along the Chinese coast and up and down the inland waterways. I believe you have a very well-developed shipyards and ship repairing facility, far ahead than India. And lots of Indian ship owners go to China for upkeep of their ships, as well as for purchase of second-hand ships from Chinese market. So, this domestic shipping vis-a-vis the Chinese shipping in international trade, are they administered by completely two independent ministries, or they are only handled by one apex ministry?
I'm not quite sure, but you know, we have a Ministry of Transportation. I think that ministry is in charge of the matters or issues you talk about. I think that yeah, it's true. You know, the domestic shipping. I think the China to some extent is self-sufficient. Yeah, we have many shipyards. They have many. Maybe in this area, in terms of the small and the medium-sized ships, you know, Chinese market has been, you know, quite very much matured. You know, very much so many competitions. It's difficult for foreign you know, ship companies to enter. It's very difficult. Yeah, this is what I can tell you. Mm-hmm.
I am I'm a political science student. My Chinese politics is controlled by Communist Party. It is committed to the socialism with the Chinese characteristics, and they're continuing with that. On the other hand, economy and economic reforms going towards a capitalism, more on private sector, and that which means there is a contradiction exists. The present day crisis has something to do with this sort of a contradiction, being politically committed to one thing and economically going towards that. For compare with India, in India, the Socialist Party and society, the dominant political class has already buried it in the constitution. Since 1990s, they are going towards liberalization, capitalist way of this thing and all. So they are given up. But China, it is given there. But this contradiction lead to some sort of crisis, which we have seen in Soviet Union also. Soviet Union, they identified some of the drawbacks, but it seems the medicine they prescribe that of capitalism. Socialist economy, socialist party, and some shortcomings are there. So criticize that. The medicine they prescribe is that of capitalist medicine, and that has collapsed the system. Same way, politically, it is going towards that, and what sort of adjustment they are going to do in China, whether it also lead to some sort of system crisis, and whether the present crisis, devaluation, this thing is a reflection of that sort of a crisis going towards, and contradiction politically one towards one, and economically different way. Whether Soviet type of some sort of crisis it can emerge or not. What is your thing?
Yes, we are on the way to establish a Chinese, establish a system. We call it a socialist, not market economy with Chinese characteristic. You mentioned that, and it's a combination of the current political system with a fundamental role played by market mechanism. We try to combine them together, and so far the model we have can be viewed as a successful one, because we achieved a lot in terms of economic development, in terms of the reduction of poverty, and so on and so forth. You talked about the future of emerging crisis, the Soviet type crisis. Well, I think the model, the political model we have is quite different from the Soviet model. We learned something from Soviet Union. We plan our economy. We call ours a centrally planned economy, but in essence we are totally different in many ways. For example, in Soviet Union, the central government plan everything, from steel, crude oil, and tractors, to pencils, to matches, the lighters, cigarettes. But in China, on the one hand, we have a centrally planned program. On the other, particularly in countryside, we have we call it township enterprises. We have private plot, a piece of land, not owned, but belong to different farmers. They can calculate on that piece of land and enjoy the yields. And at the same time, the plan, the central plans we had were not that restrictive. In Soviet Union, the central plans are a sort of law. If you cannot meet the criteria or planning requirements, you are criminals. You are against law. But in China, the plan are more or less flexible, and that means the market more or less played a role in China's economy during the period of during the period prior to reform and opening up policy, which start in the late 1970s. So we are we are belong to different systems. For the time being, I don't think China will face the Soviet type crisis. No. The shortage, one major reason for the collapse of the Soviet Union is the shortage of goods and services. But today's China, we are facing overcapacity. We are facing the emerging crisis generated by deflation rather than inflation. So we are facing totally different situations. So I don't think China there is emerging a Soviet type crisis in China. I don't think so. I'm not sure if I correctly understand your question.
Yes, that's all right. But that contradiction, political issue, and economic issue, that contradiction, how we are going to?
The same questions. Oh yeah.
Could I respond a little bit? Because I also study political science. I read a book last year. It's from Fukuyama, Political Order and Political Decay. I think you're quite familiar with this book as well. He said, no political system or certain model economically and politically could go extreme. Anything that goes to extreme is not good. He said he reconsidered the system, the political system of the United States, and say that sometimes too much debate and takes too long and not enough money for of the government, of the central government to do for the public goods. So somehow we need a moderate, a comfortable model. Even we dislike the word of model. It's like I quote from President Xi Jinping that the good shoes is the one that fits your feet. So there's nothing that extremely right or extremely wrong. So it only happens that something fits you is the good one. Okay, thank you.
Please. So I'm Vivek Sahai. I was the chairman railway board. I retired 4 years ago. And with a lot of awe, I have seen how railways in China have transformed itself. I think back in 1991, Indian railways and Chinese railways were almost the same type, with the same speeds. But in the 90s, you took over and have gone in for high-speed railway system in a very big way. I was associated with Planning Commission in doing a report on the restructuring and reforming of the Indian railways, in which we studied the Chinese railway system at great length. We find that the high-speed railway system of China is still not making money except on 2 routes. And a huge subsidy is going from the government to make these railways run. Now with a change in the climate, in the economic climate of China, do you think that that kind of subsidy can continue, and will it be possible for the Chinese economy to sustain that kind of investment in the high-speed railway system that you are envisaging? What do you think is going to happen in the next 10 years? My other question is slightly different. We are going to have the United Nations General Assembly very shortly, where SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, will be decided. And I think the MDGs, which were decided in 2000, did very well because Chinese economy did very well in last 10, 15 years. You pulled out nearly 20 to 30 million people out of poverty, and the goal could be made more because what China could achieve, not the rest of the world. But what do you think about the SDGs which have to be decided? Because the Paris meet in December is going to have a very strong effect on the future of economy of the world, and more so for China and India. Do you think that CBDR, the common but differentiated goals for the reduction in the GHG and other, to ensure that 2-degree increase in temperature only is achieved by the end of the century, do you think that India should be treated differently in that meeting or not? These are two different types.
The question you raised is about real estate investment, right?
Investment
High-speed railway. Oh, okay.
Also subsidy.
Yeah. Yes. I think it's a good question. This kind of questions has been raised many times in China by some economists. They question the heavily investment in high-speed railway because economically this kind of investment cannot be be profitable. It eventually will be money losing project, and the government, especially the central government, will be the will be the financer, the last resort, will act as a last resort to take over all the debts caused by that kind of investment. It's true. But when we talk about the high-speed railway, we need to think about the areas where the high-speed railway gets through. The real estate prices, go or went higher and higher. Now, because of the high-speed railway, 10 times or even more. So the provinces or the localities benefit a lot from the construction of a high-speed railway. So when we calculate the benefits and the costs of construction of high-speed railway, we need to think about I'll call it combining all the whole picture of that kind of investment. The country as a whole benefit from that. But the Ministry of Railway, of course, it lose money. But country as a whole benefit a lot from that kind of construction. This is the answer I gave you.
So that subsidy will continue.
At present, the company, the national railway company, which is state-owned enterprises, is losing money. It's true, but gradually, I think, the losses they make will be decreasing, and the gap will be covered by the central government, and I think together with overcapacity, the Chinese government will do the same thing in the near future, at least in the future.
So my second question was about the Paris meet, climate change meet, the COP.
Paris climate conference, right? It's a complicated, it's. I'm not expert, The question raised by our, Indian friends, covers quite wide range, quite wide areas. It's a test for me. Let me try to answer. Because, it's very difficult for the position like mine. I'm director of Institute of World Economics and Policies. So this kind of directors is usually supposed to know everything about politics and economics. So this position makes me not a specialist or expert on some specific areas. I have to learn every minute. So let me try to answer your question. Climate change or emission of CO2 is one of our, today's, top priority. China's government has already decided to cut emission of CO2 in the coming years. And we have announced that CO2 emission of China will peak by 2027. I think it's a big and responsible and bold commitment. It will peak. China is still on the way to modernize its economy. That means the consumption of energy will increase in quite a long period of time. So that announcement, I think, is very important. We'll peak our CO2 emission by 2027. And we also seriously think about introducing some new technologies to reduce the consumption of energy, and we shut down a huge number of energy-consuming plants or projects in order to use energy efficiently, to make contribution to the world climate change program. This is a very general answer to your question. Yeah, I'm not expert on that period.
We have time for 2 more questions before we move on to our next session.
Yeah, please.
So probably
Thanks. Okay. The world is seriously concerned about slowing economic growth in China. But China has been growing in almost double digits over the last 30 years, and it now started to slow down. But it's slowing from a very high base. So is that such a matter of great concern? Should it be a matter of great concern? Is one. And second, all said and done, Chinese economy is substantially commodity driven. Growth is commodity driven. Whether it is consumption of energy products or production, processing, import and consumption of all metals or agriculture commodities, the growth comes substantially from commodities, including in fixed asset investment, infrastructure investment, etc. I track Chinese trade data month on month. And the last number that I have is for the month of July. And I found there is no marked or substantial decline in China's imports. Number one. You look at crude oil, month on month, actually the July numbers are more than the June numbers. Copper ore and copper concentrate. Soybean, just taking some examples. All these numbers are up month on month and year on year, which means whether it is an energy product or a metal or an agriculture commodity, imports are up month on month and year on year. And I expect this will continue. And I also don't think the depreciation of the currency is going to impact imports in a big way. On the other hand, the depreciation of the currency will boost exports, product exports particularly, out of crude oil. And that should actually help the economy. And therefore, do you agree with this view that are China fears overdone? Is the question I want to ask. The fear over China slowdown, is it overdone? Is the world unduly worried about China's slowdown? Is one question. And one or two related questions. Do you see further depreciation of the currency? Third, do you see any capital control being imposed by the government? Do you see further depreciation? Sorry. All said and done, the currency is under pressure. There is pressure.
Yeah, yes. You're,
What is your gut read?
yes. Last month, China, China's monetary authority devalued its currency by around 4%. Some people think this is a quite a radical move under the pressure of the devaluation of other currencies against the U.S. dollar. Yes, we have been under the pressure because trade-related trade-weighted exchange rate of Chinese currency against the U.S. dollar has been increased by 15% during the past several years, and China's export the increase the growth rate of China's exports decreased substantially. So we have been under pressure. The majority of Chinese economists agree, think, oh, it's fine. They agree that the steps taken by the monetary authority of China. The further devaluation of Chinese currency, I don't think so. There are two groups of economists. One argues that we need one stroke devaluation. The other group of economists think in order to exert less substantial or significant shock to the world economy, we need to carry out a step-by-step policy. But I think one stroke policy is correct.
You've already taken 2 steps.
Yeah,
Will you take a third step?
Yeah.
That becomes evaluation.
Yeah. But I think 4% is enough.
Yeah, that's right.
At least for the coming several months. It's fine with us. So and also we are facing after taking that steps, we are facing pressure from the United States. They always criticize China as a manipulator of of the exchange rate policies and so on and so forth. So it's a trade-off. It's a trade-off. On the one hand, we have to devalue our currency. On the other, we are facing the pressure from the United States. So it's a trade-off. It's a balance.
No.
There is one more round of devaluation left. Well, let's wait.
No, I
you
had.
think there will be one more step?
Yes, I think so.
You think so? Yeah. You think. Maybe, but within 1 year, I think 5% devaluation is. I think it's a ceiling. It's a ceiling.
I had a related question, the same thing, not only the United States, but I think some of the Southeast Asian countries are also worried because what I think China is doing is beggar my neighbor policy, putting it in an economist terms. So we as Indian currencies or the Thai currency or the Indonesian, we have trading between us, though it's all dollar related. Ultimately, the goods and services do have a base in what China is doing because of the importance it has in this area. So I think we are very worried on this policy. And I don't say 5% is a ceiling. I think if we follow this type of a thing, our politicians will also then say, no, our exports are suffering, our trade is suffering, let's do the same devaluation, much larger way. So this is what I wanted you to address because this is our worry as much as United States. They have got a large economy with a good base. So I respect
So
an
in
answer
the meantime, news has arrived that Australian Prime Minister has been removed. Tony Abbott loses out to Turnbull. So Mr. Mathur, and I think after that we close the questions, then they can answer. Yeah, just get him. Otherwise, what happens is before he puts a question, everyone else asks. So.
Thank you, Ashish. Sazang, my question is directly is that in economic relations, where can India and China partner? I'm with, as you know, with Gateway House, which is like a sister think tank to ORF. And part of the responsibility lies with us as researchers and policy analysts to come up with ideas on bilateral relations. But we've been looking at 2 or 3 areas, but without much success. For instance, I would think that 2 or 3 areas like climate change, energy, because both countries are big energy consumers, anything related to population, education, healthcare, anything, because we're the only 2 countries which have a billion plus population. Any 2 countries which is plus 400 million population, right? These are some of the areas which one would think would be natural areas for economic partnership or other things, because we don't have anything in common anymore, And China, obviously, to its credit, has become a $9 trillion economy. It has grown politically, geopolitically, everything. So I'd like to know where can we partner? What can we do together to set some good examples of good economic partnership?
I'd like to give a relatively concrete idea for my own, how to facilitate the China and the India economic partnership relationship. And for the time being, you can see that the BRICS banks is led by India, and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is led by China. But for sure, it's for the time being. But it's a good opportunity for China and India to deepen our economic cooperation. And I give you an example that in the early this year, I visited the branch of ADB in Beijing, and the vice president of ADB, who is a Chinese official, he told me that he has a strong intention to believe that the AIB could find good opportunities to cooperate with other MDBs such as AIB and ADB. And he said that he's in charge of the lending projects of Southern and Western Asia. And according to my memory, it is Pakistan. And the Pakistan gave an application of a project and amounted to over 10 billion US dollars. And it is a good, very good project, and according to the evaluation of the ADB. But ADB cannot give such kind of scale of lending. It's too large. So the vice president told us that it is a good example to facilitate the cooperation between an ADB and AIB and the BRICS banks. So in this area, I think China and India could make many cooperation opportunities to facilitate the joint lending for the AIB and the BRICS bank. And it's a good opportunity to facilitate the reform of the MDBs. You know, up to now, there is no cooperation mechanism among the MDBs. And in my personal view, I always argue that China and India should jointly have an initiative to build such kind of mechanism to facilitate the MDB's cooperation. It's a good opportunity. So it's a concrete example.
Okay, I think that brings us to a closure. I just wanted to make a few comments on what kind of missed out. I had several questions ready in case none of you asked. And fortunately, none of them, these questions were asked. One was, I mean, of course, he doesn't have to answer. It's just that probably next session, which is there for longish period, probably some of that could be touched upon. One is that Indians thought they were world champions in corruption. But now we have been informed that China is much bigger than us in corruption. So how do you kind of, I mean, one of the reasons why people give, people have rationalized Chinese slowdown is basically the crackdown on corruption that the new government or the new president has tried to crack down the corruption, and that's why there has been a kind of slowdown in projects implementation, and that's creating whatever issues that are happening. Second issue is that we have the same issue as China, but China has much larger issue of capital flight. Currently, whatever we are seeing from the government is, although trying to worry about the markets and all, but the largest amount of noise over last 3 months is basically in respect to capital flight, and that is more interesting to me than anything else. And third thing, which is what I mentioned about the news, is that last week I think there were news about Canadian government changing. This week there is a news of Australian government changing, and most of it is, I think, a China effect, as we call it, because these resource countries are going through recession of sorts because China is stopped buying the resources. And so these are the 3 observations I thought I will just put up in front of all the learned people here. So thank you very much, sir, for your ability to answer all the questions that were put to you. I mean, you are what I call complete all-rounder. I don't think anyone can answer questions of this magnitude and this span. So thank you very much, sir, for your ability to answer all that and very, very detailed.